All right, ready? Okay, so what is your name?
John James.
And what is your educational background?
I'm an associate's degree from RCC, and I'm currently a student at CBU in junior.
Okay. Do you work or are you retired?
I work
And what's your current position?
DPS officer, public safety officer at CBU.
And do you have any children?
Yes.
What are their ages?
33, 22, and 20.
And where were you born and raised?
Well, I was born on a military base in Ankara, Turkey, and I lived in Texas, Ohio, and California primarily.
Where'd you raise your family? Where'd you raise your kids at?
California,
Riverside or?
Marina Valley, and Riverside.
Okay. And now the next set of the interview is going to go over more so like your media consumption growing up. So think about like growing up and even up to this point today. The interview is going to really deal with like media consumption, how it's kind of impacted your life and kind of that aspect. And first we're going to go over like sound recording. So what records do you listen to?
Primarily when I was a kid. You're talking about from my childhood up?
Yeah, you can talk about from your childhood even to this day, if it's changed or if it's the same.
Primarily as a kid, you have to remember back when I was growing up, there was not the same as like SoundCloud and all the available ways to listen to music now. So it was I either got my music from the radio, or if I had the money, I could buy an album, which didn't happen too often. So I got everything from the radio primarily.
So when you say album, you actually mean like a vinyl record?
Yeah, or 45.
45.
Yeah.
So what type of music genre would you say is what you primarily listen to?
I was privileged to listen to everything because I had older sisters and my mom, so I listened to everything from the Beatles to Led Zeppelin to Aerosmith to radio. Back then, they didn't play. You didn't have like a hip hop station per se. It was just music that it was. How can I describe it? They played anything from R&B to rock and roll on the same station. So I think later on it started to split off where you had more specific genre radio stations: hip hop, rock and roll, classical. I mean, obviously you didn't have classical mixed with rock and roll, but as far as like the everyday music that everybody listened to, it was like it kind of blended. It kind of blended all together.
And so who would you say was your favorite recording artist?
Oh wow! Like I said, I'm telling you, from Michael McDonald's to the Doobie Brothers, Michael Jackson, Prince. It was everything. I didn't have a
No specific.
I would say Prince was probably the biggest influence in my life.
Okay. Do you remember having a record player?
Yeah.
Do you remember what brand it was or what kind it was?
I'm trying to think. I don't remember. I can't recall.
Was it at your house?
Yeah.
In your room? In the living room? Was it like?
It was in the living room. It was a big console, and it had like a radio, a record player built into it, and it was all one unit. First it was like 8-track, and then we went from 8-track to that to an actual record player.
Was there any kind of music that you weren't supposed to listen to, and if so, why?
I didn't have anything at that time that was particularly bad or considered a bad influence.
Were you allowed to play music whenever you wanted, or were there parental limitations in your home?
Again, there was for the time I grew up, there was no need for you didn't have a clean version. Everything there was no cussing on records. You didn't have that, so there was never a concern. Then you might have had homes where parents were like, "It's rock and roll. That's the devil's music" type thing. But in my home, it wasn't. It was never like that. It was.
Were your parents listening to the same stuff you were listening to?
R&B wise, I think my parents listened to a little bit of jazz and probably gospel more than anything. But there was probably more centered towards like Al Green, Marvin Gaye, where I was a little bit more open to what was on the radio.
So more like pop culture stuff.
Yeah, the radio played. You listened to a little bit of everything.
Do you remember how much like a record cost?
No, I'm trying to think because I very seldom did I buy an album. I remember used to trying to record stuff off the radio and waiting for a certain song to come on the radio and record it off the radio. The recording sounded horrible, but at least you had the recording.
That was like
on
the
the radio.
early stages of piracy,
Yeah,
right?
pretty
That's what we would do. We would put a cassette player in our boombox.
Yeah.
We call them boomboxes, and we would hit record when the song would come on the radio. Right. I should do the same thing. If you did buy a record, was there like a specific store you went to? Like I remember growing up, like Warehouse Records was like super popular. Was there one?
There was one in Moreno Valley called Majestic Sounds. Majestic Sounds in the shopping center on the corner of Sunnymead Boulevard and Heacock, I believe. That's where the Big Five's at. It's like right there in the corner.
How did you find out about artists you listened to?
Growing up, I grew up in a house where, like I said, my mom, music was an integral part of our house. So I found out just, how can I put it? My mom had records, my dad had certain things he listened to, and just the radio. The radio was such a big influence. That's all you had. You didn't have social media, you didn't have the internet or anything like that. So everything that you were presented to you was if somebody went out and they loved, you had to really like music because you would support that artist by buying the album. So you couldn't just stream it or borrow an album from a friend. If you really liked it, you went out and bought the album and you played it and you wore the grooves out of the album or whatever.
What did your parents think about records and record players?
Oh, they've always had them in the house. Like I said, my family was a big musical family. We had musicians in our family. I'm a musician myself, so for me, there was music in the house all the time. More music than television, actually.
So that kind of goes into my next question, probably seamlessly. How do you think music influenced your life as a child and adolescent? Do you think listening and consuming music and different genres kind of influenced you becoming a musician?
Oh yeah, I think primarily growing up, I heard so many things. I didn't even know why I liked it at the time. It wasn't a white or black. It was just good music. I didn't care who was playing it. I just listened to it like, oh, I like that song. Well, is it a white guy playing? Well, I don't like the song. That was never none of that. It was always just, did it move me in a certain way from even hearing classical music. I heard classical music as a kid. I remember listening to Moonlight Sonata. I think it's Beethoven. Yeah, Beethoven. I remember thinking to myself, this is a beautiful piece of music. Not knowing why. The structure of the song was totally different. There's no drum beat. There's nothing that would make you dance. But I just remember liking that particular song. And that's probably just me being a musician and just having an affinity for music. But yeah, I don't know. I think just I was influenced by so much. But Prince, when I heard him, that made me want to play. That's the first time I remember wanting to play an instrument. When I started listening to Prince, Cameo, Barkays, and like I said, Doobie Brothers, Michael McDonald.
Was there a specific instrument that you wanted to learn how to play?
Bass, because we're talking about 70s, so bass was a heavy influence. We're talking about. I'm not sure why I should have picked guitar, but bass I think was probably one of the main driving forces in the music that I primarily listened to. While I listened to everything, R&B was probably the most I listened to.
Okay. What type of sound recordings did your children listen to?
Oh, wow.
CDs, tapes, 8-tracks?
No, more the internet. Anything they were streaming stuff off of.
It's like MP3s.
Yeah, not even MP3s. I would say they had. I'm trying to think. So they were born in '99 and '96. So by the time they got to the age of listening to music, we're talking early 2000s. So what was available then? Whatever was available at the time, I couldn't even tell you. There were
like, did they have like iPods and stuff like that?
Yeah, but I don't even remember. It seems like for as long as I can remember, when they really started getting into music, where it was important to them, because normally they would listen to what I would play, and I think I influenced my kids, which brings this point. My kids listened. I was listening to CDs in my car and around the house, and my wife at the time, same thing, CDs in the house. So we constantly had music playing. This was in CDs. So their first influence of everything was through CDs, and I played everything. So because I grew up, I told them to listen to Red Hot Chili Peppers, the Beatles. Try to listen to this. Check this out. If you like this, you're gonna love this. So they didn't discover their own type of music till they got older, but they were already influenced. So they were more receptive to everything. They didn't just dismiss it.
They were more open-minded.
Oh yeah, there was no like, oh,
genres.
what is that? What were the Beatles? Or why are you listening to that? So there was no, and I did it on purpose. I did it by design to make sure that no, I don't want you listening to this because it's by a black artist or whatever. So you're like closed minded. Listen to everything because there's good music out there by everybody. And just because it's kind of silly when you think about it, how people will automatically dismiss the genre of music because they don't know they don't play this way. I don't like it because it's this type. So you don't know there's certain country songs you might like, but because it's been labeled country, you automatically I don't listen to that. That's country. And so so I'd say CD was their primary early on was their primary stream of music, if you will. Then later on, I don't remember my kids getting it like the iPods and all that stuff. It just seemed like
they kind of skipped that, yeah, because it kind of went from iPods, MP3s to like now just straight streaming.
Right.
Like what is it, Spotify and
Apple
iTunes, and you have that, and then you also
I would say iTunes.
Like,
iTunes probably was the first big as far as computers. That was like everybody iTunes card. That's what they would ask for iTunes. I would give that for Christmas.
They would buy songs that way.
Yeah, so they would do it that way.
So how did they experience music or sound recordings different than you did while growing up?
Oh, just everything they wanted to listen to.
Just a different type of like platform or formatting or
that. Yeah, through the internet, plus artists that were posting stuff. I think my son.
Now you had mentioned that when you were growing up, music was more clean, but as your kids were growing up, there was more explicit content. Did you prohibit them from listening to that stuff, or were you still the same mindset of like allowing them to listen to that type of music?
Well, early on, they only listened to what I played, and so they kind of like they liked it or didn't like it because they got in the car. That was their only outlet to music. They didn't have their own identity to where they went in the room, closed the door, and played their own type of music. They just kind of transitioned from our car to by the time they got into junior high, that's when they probably started trying to branch out and listen to their own stuff. And there was nothing, like I said, the stuff they were listening to was still kind of influenced by what I had previously shown them. So they didn't have, I listened to a lot of hip hop. So for me, I knew about NWA, I knew about stuff that had explicit lyrics, but I wasn't playing that in front of my kids. Now, that wasn't necessarily by design. It was just something I didn't do because it wasn't, ironically enough, that's probably the least popular music to me. And I knew about it and I enjoyed it for the beat. If I went out to a club, yeah, they had hip hop, but as far as my personal listening, when I'm on my own time, I didn't play a lot of hip hop. I had it, but I didn't play a lot of it, especially around the kids. And again, it wasn't at the time, it wasn't a conscious decision that I don't want to expose my kids to this. It's just something I didn't want to listen to it. And so as they got older, they kind of started getting influenced by, or poisoned, if you will, by outside sources because I think junior high is that age where you start your kids go to school and they meet somebody with brothers and sisters that are in high school and all of a sudden they make them hip to like, hey, have you heard this? And have you heard that? Because up until then, you have all the influence over your children until they get to that age to where they meet other kids with older brothers and sisters, and that's where all the new ideas come from.
That's interesting. So next with radio, what do you remember about your experiences with radio?
The DJ. The DJ was the biggest personality. Rick Dees. You had dudes that were like, it was a radio personality, big boy in the morning. It just as I transitioned from that, I started listening to more sports talk radio.
So what kinds of programs do you listen to? Entertainment, music, talk?
Sports, ESPN. So I listened to ESPN. I would listen to, actually, I got on this thing where I was listening to Dr. Laura, or you start listening to K-Wave. You listen to just anything that would kind of pique your interest at a time. I wouldn't necessarily do it every single day, but I think the main thing, the reason I listened to Dr. Laura, because that was one of the only channels that came in like extra clear. You could move your knob like a millimeter, it would still be like so clear that you're like, well, I guess I'm listening to this.
Having to actually move the knob to the radio station.
Yeah, so it's like it's really clear.
Which is interesting because it's still around, but I don't think it's very popular. It's like AM radio,
right?
Which is a lot of talk radio, which I like KFI and I listen to that stuff. I know you still listen to like sports radio on AF,
and NPR,
AM, right?
And NPR stuff. So it's just kind of now you podcast stuff. So now you can be really specific to your listeners. Like, I want to hear about this.
I think that's one of the major differences nowadays versus, before. with streaming and everything, you can pretty much listen to anything whenever you want. Whereas there used to be a time, even when I was growing up, where if you wanted to listen to a specific program, you had to actually tune in during that time.
Right.
You know, nowadays you can listen to recorded episodes if you miss it. You know, that's something that's new, where it wasn't like that even when I was growing up. Do you remember anything about early radio commercials that stands out to you?
Yeah, a lot of them, and I remember the same songs being played over and over. It was so it was almost like you listen to it. If you listen to the radio long enough, you can almost like time. Like they're going to play these 3 songs in this particular. Like, didn't they just play that song? And then I realized that I heard there was like what they call it. I think it's called payola, where where record companies would pay a radio station a certain amount of money to keep playing this record over and over and over again.
So like advertisements in between music. Do you remember any of those type of commercials? Like what was advertised a lot? Do you remember any of those
I can't think of dealerships, car dealerships. A lot of those food commercials, McDonald's commercials and stuff like that. But now that I think about it, I don't have a real clear memory of certain commercials. TV commercials I have because it's more visual, so that sticks with me a little better. Radio commercials, again.
Not so much. Do you remember any public concerns about radio commercials?
Not at the time.
Okay. Do you remember any educational radio programs?
Not when I was growing up. Like that now, I listen to a lot of educational radio, but back when I was a kid, no.
What technical problems did you experience with your radio set?
With the station would just go out. It was just like, not for a long period of time, but just like, it would just go silent. And it didn't happen often, but you're thinking like, what's going on with the radio? It's strange. I remember, it's funny you mentioned that. I remember TV used to have the dignity to cut off at some point. It would go dark. National anthem, or whatever, not the national anthem, but they would play it, and it would go dark. You get a blank screen. Now, it doesn't go off. It's like you're going to watch something. We're going to make sure you get exposed to something. TV used to go off. Now it doesn't, obviously. But yeah, I remember that thinking like, oh, it's late. TV's taking a break. It would get that little white screen would come up, and it's like a little radar deal or whatever it was. It would come up on the screen, and TV would be dark.
Wow. That's interesting. Do you have any specific memories, good or bad, about listening to the radio when you were young? And if so, what were they?
Good things about radio. A song could take you to a place that you'd have a memory. You could be on vacation, or you could be with a girl or at a party. It will take you back to a certain spot. That's the power of music. The power of music can transport you from one place to the other. And I know this specifically being a musician in church, the fact that you had to be mindful of the type of music you play, because you could play a gospel tune, and if you segued into a top 40 tune or secular music, you've now transported that person in the audience who went from going from probably giving himself to the Lord or thinking about that girlfriend they were with, because you started playing Earth, Wind, and Fire. And I didn't realize this at the time this was happening, but I listened to Craig G. Lewis. He was talking about that, how music's so powerful, how you can take somebody where they're thinking they're in the spirit at one moment because you're playing a gospel song, and as a musician, it's not, especially in the black church. I'm speaking from this because I know we do this a lot as musicians. We'll transition into secular music, just the music, not the words, but we'll play it, and everybody's like, "Oh, that's that's what Kanye used." And it's kind of scary because you do it without thinking about it. You're being selfish because you're into it as a musician, and you're kind of just going off into this other genre, but you don't realize that you're taking that person who might have been dealing with something then. Now you just took them back to the night they were in the club. So they went from being Christ-centered to now being club-centered, because that was my song. Yeah. I like that song. So now, and I wasn't aware of that until somebody had mentioned it to me before.
Wow. That's interesting. What was it like when FM radio became available?
When you could get it, I think you had to be in a car. I remember having the radio in a certain spot in the house. in order to pick up the signal. AM was like, had that in the background, but you could pick it up a little. It was more available. Certain places, FM, you had to be in the right spot, antenna, in the garage, certain place in the house. Your car, the signal came in pretty clear. But that was the only thing that was frustrating.
And now it seems like FM comes in clear and AM is harder to get in some areas. Let's see. Did your or how do you think radio influenced your life as a child and adolescent?
Just musically, I think music is so. I don't even know where I'd be without music because I think music is. It's
a big part of your
stress
life
relief. It's because for me it was a fabric. It was interwoven into the fabric of my life to sound kind of like a commercial. I don't know where I'd be without it. I mean, it's just one of those things that gets me. I can say at one point, music probably saved my life because when I was going through my divorce, the only thing I could do was play. The only thing that brought me solace and brought me peace of mind was playing music. And because I had that to turn to. I didn't have a lot of friends, but I could always play guitar, play a bass, or listen to music, or figure something out, or study some theory that would pass some time for me. So it brought me comfort. It still does. It brings me comfort to this day.
Yes. Did your children listen to the radio? And if so, what was it like for them?
Truthfully, when they were old enough to listen, I think the main thing I think kids listen to the radio primarily when they're in their cars. My kids didn't listen to, because when they started listening to music, again, they had the luxury of, hey, I'm listening to, was it iTunes? So they played. They get frustrated with commercials now. So now you DVR something, it's like everywhere you can fast forward, no more commercials, so they're not exposed to as many commercials. And that's why they actually prefer, the iTunes route or, like I said, recording something and fast forwarding through all commercials where they can. So they're not influenced by commercials as much.
How do they experience radio differently than you did while growing up?
Well, they don't listen to the radio. Like I said, everything. There's my favorite song I can play. Like I said, they stream it through Apple Play or what's the one, Spotify or iTunes. They have it already.
So, like you mentioned, like there was radio personalities and DJs and the music. So it's kind of like a full experience for you. Where you say nowadays, like your children, it's more just about the song. Like
I don't even think they probably know Big Boy because he's been around so long. I mean, and he's not even known for their music; they're known for their skits. Big Boy in the Morning. People will know them for outlandish behavior. And I know there's other radio stations out there that people listen to. The morning drive radio they have where the music,
Kiss FM,
the music's secondary.
Ryan Seacrest,
Ryan Seacrest.
K-Rock has Kevin and Bean, and
so
those different. I mean, there's still those radio personalities. I don't think they're as popular with the younger generation.
Like I said, they get their own. It's just about the music for them. So they're listening to the artists that aren't even necessarily signed to a label, and you have that avenue of music you can listen to. Like, hey, check this guy out on SoundCloud. Go to my channel, go to YouTube, and that's the thing where guys they're a million strong, and they're not even signed with a record label. But it's like, no, everybody knows about so and so. You haven't heard this guy? And it's like, no, I don't know who that is. Underground. It's almost even more hip to be underground. To have an underground following, to go against the mainstream. Like, no, I don't want to be corporate. I want to be underground because, like I said, it adds not only street cred, but it gives you a certain amount of hipster quality about you that you're not public. People that know. The ones that are hip know about you. The ones that don't, they kind of get turned on later on. And by the time it reaches mainstream, they can't help but control it. They can't help but reaching mainstream because they become so big. It's almost like the harder they try to remain underground, and they know this too. So everybody that plays music, I think, has they want to sell their records and they want to be heard, and they probably not necessarily want to be famous, but they definitely want to be heard because that's why they make music as artists. They're performing, so they want to be known, but at the same time, they don't want to be so mainstream that they lose their edge.
So now, next we'll talk about television and cable. So what was it like when TV became available? Did you always have a TV growing up?
I always had TV.
So was it like something you guys went out and bought? Like it was always a TV in your house? How many TV sets would you say were in your house?
One. Yeah, one.
Okay. Where did you watch your first TV programs, and what was the viewing experience like?
In the den, we had TV shows where you had the Sanford and Son, Good Times, All in the Family, just shows that were popular TV shows. You only had 2 through 13. We didn't have HBO, and I think it was on TV. I want to say back then it was the cable. It was like when they had movies. I think it was called On TV, ONTV. It was one word, and that cost. So it was kind of one of those things where you were able to receive the channels with rabbit ears alone. Then it got to the point where you can't watch TV unless you have basic cable. And after that was years later as an adult that became the norm. But as a kid, you could watch, I think, channels 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13 without having a cable connection. Those were like available channels that you could just get, just cutting on your TV, putting your rabbit ears on, and adjusting them and doing that whole thing.
How much did your family's first TV set cost, and what factors figured into its purchase?
Well, I'm not sure. I just remember it was a console. It wasn't a small TV. It wasn't. They didn't have like 55-inch screens. So I'm thinking it was the console was bigger. The thing was like a dresser with a screen stuck in the middle of it. So there was a lot of extra. There's speakers on the side of it. I'm not even sure that, but it wasn't like surround sound, or the TV wasn't particularly loud because the speakers, it looked like it could be loud, but I'm telling you, it had to be like 5 feet across, and the TV couldn't have been no more than 25 inches, maybe.
So, as far back as you can remember, you remember always having a TV set in the house. You don't remember like going out with your family to purchase a TV set.
No.
It was just always there.
No, it was always there. That and the record player.
What was the reception like?
As far as
like, how did the channels come in?
It came in clear. The ones you could get. Like I said, those were the 2 through 13. There was no cable, so I guess whatever they did back then to make the channels available, everybody could get them. You didn't have to pay a monthly service fee to watch TV.
So there wasn't a lot of channels like you mentioned, like nowadays. So maybe how many channels do you think?
There was 2 through 13.
2 through 13.
Channel 2, Channel 4, Channel 5, Channel 7, Channel 9, 11.
And you mentioned some of the programming. What else do you remember? Like, you mentioned some of the shows that were on. Was there anything else that was on TV?
Primarily soap operas. So you had all As the World Turns, Young and the Restless, General Hospital. The popular soaps back in the day in the 70s, I'm not sure if those were on. I think when I started paying attention to know their names. But sporting events, the Olympics seemed to be a really big deal. For some reason, that stands out in my mind, the Olympics. And Super Bowl and World Series. Basketball was floundering back then. It wasn't even popular. But yeah, those are the main sports. Baseball.
What about news media? Anything? You remember any news
Walter
channels?
Cronkite I remember him as a kid. Jerry Dunphy later on, but Walter Cronkite was like, his voice is synonymous. Like you see the characters on The Simpsons, hear that voice. I mean, the newscasters all speak in a certain voice, but I think Walter Cronkite was the main. When you thought about a newscaster, that's what I thought about. I don't even remember a female newscaster at the time, let alone even the weather. News appeared at the time as a kid, but it seemed more serious all the time. It seemed like there was never like no. On a lighter note, we're going to go to such and such in the field, and she's got a flower shop. It was never none. It was always very somber, very serious. It was always something, so and so got shot, or Nick Watergate. Those are the big things I remember, happening. Where, it was always more. It seemed more serious. There was nothing playful about it.
What was like a typical family viewing session like for you?
Oh, mom, dad, sister. My oldest sister was gone by the time I was in junior high. So
would you guys get together and watch?
Yeah, there was some programming. Before I had to go to bed, we'd watch TV. Watch my parents' programs, which were for that time, Cosby's. It was like kind of everybody's program. So if you watched it, you kind of like, no, you're not watching the Cosby. Did you guys see the Cosby episode? Wasn't a lot of choices like there is now. Hill Street Blues. Trying to think. L.A. Law. That's probably a little bit later, but still, there was only so many shows. You didn't have that many options. So if it was a popular show, you watched it or you didn't watch it. It wasn't like you could flip over to another channel.
How did TV change your home life?
I think it, in a way, it was kind of like it drew everybody to the same room because you had one TV in the room. So if you wanted to watch TV, you'd be in there with your family and you'd watch. I was the remote, first of all. Hey, boy, get up and change the channel. There was no remote. So I was like, hey, while you're up, or hey, get up and put it on channel 2. So I was the remote. So, but it pretty much put everybody in the same room. So where it wasn't necessarily, there was talking, there was laughter going on, you were commenting on the TV show or the commercials.
Would you guys, as a family, discuss the TV program that you watched afterwards, or?
Only in the sense that my mom might bring something up if it was something that happened to her or something that paralleled her life, or if it depends on the programming. If it was, I'll just give you an example of something where they addressed racism or civil rights or something like that. I'd ask my parents, like, hey, did you guys have to go through that? Did you drink out of a different fountain, or did you have to see signage that said, blacks only or white fountain only? Like, yeah, they had to deal with that. They had to go through that. My mom would tell me, say, I drink out of the white fountain anyway. And dared him to say something like, yeah. I don't know where you were at when you got away with that, but yeah, she was defiant. So, but yeah, we did it before. So in certain situations, I remember Roots, when Roots first came on.
Okay.
That was like a big deal. I'm talking about where I was going to junior high, and there was like people were on edge because people were upset about slavery, and it was kind of a moment, to steal a young person's phrase, we were woke by the program Roots. And there was not a lot of conversation as far as like between the white kids talking to the black kids. There was more anger in the black kids taking out on white kids at the school. It wasn't like a whole movement. It was just, I just remember in certain circles where people were less tolerable and they were looking for reasons to get into white kids because like they were watching Roots. Now they're angry because they seen, Kunta Kinte or Toby get beat, and now all of a sudden you feel like you're placing blame. I remember that. I always thought it was strange that how you're holding people responsible that had nothing to do with it, and just because by their race they're somehow guilty. And it was just, I remember feeling bad because I remember sitting in class one day and this guy's name was Digger. And that was his name, Digger, Digger, and people knew his name. But it got to the point to was at such a high pitch frenzy just to get into people. Somebody said his name Digger, and somebody said they thought he said the word nigger. And it was like, no, you go to school with this dude. You've been in class with him all year. You know his name, but you want to fight him. I think he even got hit because of it. Because somebody said, what you said, you said the N-word. But at the time they didn't say it. You said nigger. And I'm like, no, his name is Digger. That was legitimately his nickname. It wasn't like it came about because of Roots. That was his name. Just like Digger Phelps, the coach was like, that was his actual name. That was his actual name.
So that's interesting. So Roots, was it a TV show? Was it a movie?
It was a series. It was a. I guess back then how you had it was a. I forget how it was more than one. I'm not sure if it was. I don't think it was one series. I think it was like back to back, but it was like a different episode every night because you had to tell the story from how they went over from Africa, got over here. So it was like a mini series, if you will. So it was a movie. I'm not sure what they call. I guess it'd be a mini series, but it's a movie. But it was like this is going to last a certain amount of nights. It wasn't like a season. It wasn't like that. It was covered over a period of days, I believe. It wasn't like every week. It was like every Friday it would come on. It was like back to back at 8 o'clock, Channel 4 on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday would show. Previously on Roots they'd show the day before, and they get through the series. So every night people were glued, to that TV show because it was so controversial. And again, it addressed slavery and it forced black people to like, oh wow, I didn't know that. So it was kind of one of those things where like I said, still the term that kids use nowadays, people were woke, and they were kind of woke for the wrong reasons because it's like now you're being somehow you feel like I want to do something about slavery, so let me get into some white people for payback somehow, which is obviously short-lived and it's ridiculous when you sit and think about it. People have nothing to do with what happened back then, but
so as a Black American male, did Roots impact you in the same way? How did you said it was such a controversial TV show? How did you relate to the show, or what did you take from the show? Do you feel like it was historically sound? It was.
After reading certain things about slavery later on, again for that time, it addressed certain Alvin Ailey. Was it Alvin Ailey? Yeah, Alvin Ailey was the guy's name that produced the show and was the director. What he presented, he showed slaves being taken from Africa. You knew about slavery, but you didn't know how they got here, the travel, how they were stored or housed on a ship, how many people were in the hull of a ship, how many people died, how many people were thrown overboard. That to the point to where there was so many people. I guess that the route that they traveled, sharks, still to this day, it's almost like because of their memory, it's like a feeding frenzy because they were throwing that many bodies overboard, and that's what I've heard. And then, but you didn't know how many black people sold other black people into slavery. So you start getting into that element to where people don't necessarily talk about that because it sounds like, oh wow, it's not just white people coming on, taking black people and taking them back to America and selling them as slaves. Black tribesmen would kidnap or fight just as spoils of war would take other black tribesmen and sell them. So they were dealing. So you had slave brokers that were selling to white people. It wasn't. I don't think it was necessarily a black or white thing at the time. It was just we conquer these people. We're going to use them as commodity to get what we want. But I think as a black male, you're taught that white people are the ones responsible for these atrocities. And there's black people too. And I couldn't tell you I haven't studied the whole thing, but I just know it's more to it. They just go to this other country and run rough ride over these people. It was facilitated by people that actually lived in that country to make it a little bit easier for them to facilitate owning slaves or purchasing slaves, if you will. So again, I haven't studied the whole thing to the point to where.
But would you say that like Roots? Do you think it was accurate? Do you think there was biases in the?
I think there was. I don't think they delved into that part enough to where black people were aware, and I don't think there was enough. While there was writings about slavery, I don't think people took the time, as in public school or on their own, to go out and research it. Like now, you can just Google it. You go, oh, let me see what really happened here. How did this really come about? Who were there black slave owners? How did slaves, how did it come to be that ended up here? So I don't think you have.
Growing up, I mean, we have Black History Month. Did you have that growing up?
No, that was something that was. I'm not sure when that came about. February. I was pissed since it was only 28 days in that month. I said, you're going to really give us Black History Month and you're going to give us the shortest month out of the year. Nice job.
So in schools, those type of topics weren't really being addressed. So in the media is when some of these issues started to become. Yeah,
you had people that were aware certain religions that probably Israelites. And I didn't follow that. Like I said, in California, the places I grew up on a military base were pretty conservative, so you didn't have a lot of people talking overtly black power. It was kind of like, my father was an officer in the military, so you couldn't even necessarily be. Well, he wasn't always an officer. Obviously, he promoted, but there was not a lot of talk of any. I don't remember any race really until I got to junior high. That's when I think people started. I had white friends, Asian friends, because I grew up in a military base. So you had a lot of mixed race families. You had white families, black families. So you didn't even realize what color you were until I think junior high, and I think I'm not saying that movie made people realize like, oh, this person's white. I think in junior high you start kind of realizing the differences because this person likes this type of music. And again, back to the music thing, you just have commonalities that okay, I listen to AC/DC and Led Zeppelin and Van Halen, and I actually listen to those guys. So when people say I can relate to like, oh, I know that song, or I'm familiar with that, or I know the guitar players or whatever because I like the music. But if I thought being an athlete, I got along with athletes. I don't care what color you are. Can you play? That's all I care. You know, you play football, you're a white dude, you're the quarterback, you're my guy. I don't care. I didn't look at it that way. I can go over your house, you come over mine. It wasn't a big deal. I think athletes have that gift to where they can kind of go in between races, jump back and forth because they're playing on teams with black players. So you didn't look at each other as a race. You just looked at that's my teammate. And so if you're sweating with a guy, you're going through Hell Week with a guy, you're training with a guy, when you're all in pain, it doesn't matter. There's no black pain. There's no white pain. It's pain for everybody. Coaches made sure everybody got the same. They didn't care. But, I think in that regard, that's how that went.
Okay. How did what do you remember about the corporate sponsors of TV shows?
They didn't have you weren't even privy to that information. Like you didn't know like the corporate sponsor showed this or he took this off because it's going to reflect in a bad way. That's something that's it is relatively new because of the internet. Because like I said, people expose certain corporations for doing underhand business deals or what's it called, sweatshops, stuff like that. So you didn't know that Nike, selling these shoes and they sponsor this group that sponsors this group that kills animals or whatever. Right. Just like the movie Blackfish. I mean, I didn't know at the time, but it's just because of the internet that those animals were being mistreated like that. You have an idea when you go to a zoo. The first time I was really exposed to something like that, not that it's on the level of corporate, but just going to a circus and you're seeing how animals are treated for public consumption. These animals are mistreated. They're kept in small cages, and these big companies are making money off these animals. The same with corporations, how you go out and you're purchasing shoes, and like, well, how was the shoe made? Who made it? This person is somewhere in the Philippines or wherever making the shoe, and they're not getting anything for it, but they're charging us $180 for the same shoe. And they have the nerve to splash their name Nike all over everything. And, we do stuff. We test only on our, like with makeup, we test on, certain animals or no animals were harmed during the making of this product. They have a nerve to say that. And everybody knows that they're actually probably harming somebody's being harmed somewhere if there's a buck to be made.
All right. What do you remember, if anything, do you remember about the quiz show scandals?
Scandals? The quiz show. You said quiz show like as the name scandals, or just quiz show like
quiz show scandals. I remember, and I remember watching a video. I think I saw it on YouTube where there was a time that these quiz shows were actually kind of running fraud by giving the contestants the right answers or something on the lines of that. I don't remember getting into too much detail about it, but it wasn't on the up and up.
Right.
Do you remember anything
about
shows like that?
I don't remember anything on there. I remember The Price is Right. I remember the biggest thing I found out, and I thought was as a kid, you think people win these gifts and they just take them home. I didn't know there was taxes on it. And some people, I remember people complaining that they couldn't afford, people that won couldn't afford to pay the taxes.
Right.
So they had, if you won a car, it's like, well, I don't have $2,500 to pay on
all the licensing and fees and all that stuff.
I don't have the money to pay taxes on what I won.
What do you remember about the first 30-second TV commercials?
I didn't even know there was times. There's 30-second commercials. There's 15-second. Is there a standard of time that they've had over time where like this is a 30-second spot, this is a 10-second spot, this is.
I think nowadays the average commercial is 30 seconds.
So I remember a lot of Coke, a lot of Pepsi, a lot of soft drinks, a lot of food commercials, a lot of Like I said,
Do you remember
soccer.
if they were long commercials, short
No,
commercials?
they're pretty
Short.
much hit 'em and quit 'em type commercials. They were there because their attention span ain't that long. They come on and they show somebody chewing gum or whatever, and a couple's walking, and then the guy would turn around and wink and go, "I chew Wrigley's or whatever," and it was like they show him with his girlfriend. It was pretty quick. It was not long drawn out. Now commercials are like almost have a storyline. They'll continue,
Right.
and so they've gotten really clever. You almost have to follow the commercial to know, like, oh, this is from the previous, commercial that we watched. But they're pretty quick.
How do your television experiences differ from your childhood to nowadays?
Now I watch again a lot of sports talk, a lot of sports shows, or ESPN, and the shows that I do watch are just mainly cable TV shows with very few commercials.
Do you have cable or satellite now?
Satellite, DirecTV.
Satellite. What made you decide to get satellite over cable?
So football. I think
Football.
this availability of
Better
certain,
packaging.
just certain packaging, certain programs that they have that were cheaper, depending on if you bundled it with your internet or whatever. That was usually the primary focus of how I determined.
So your biggest factor that went into deciding cable versus satellite was the football package that they offered.
Yeah,
So
at the time, yeah.
there's two major satellite companies, Dish and Direct. I think Direct offers a better football package.
Yeah.
So did you go with Direct for their
At the time, Dish recently acquired their
red
football
zone
package,
or
whatever it is. DirecTV had it originally years ago, and so I went with it, just stuck with it the whole time. So I've never changed over.
so that you could watch like every game that's on?
The Cowboys basic, so I could watch my team or see.
Okay.
And again, if I wanted to watch every game, that was an option.
So that brings up an interesting question. How long have you been a Cowboys fan?
Oh wow, I grew up a Cowboys fan when I lived it.
So how would you follow the Cowboys as a child versus nowadays? You like you said, you got a satellite where you can follow their games, but how would you do it as a child?
Well, as a child, my sister, who was a nurse at Baylor Hospital, she graduated from TWU, Texas Women's University in Denton, Texas, and she, upon graduation, I guess she worked. I want to say she worked at Baylor Hospital in Texas. She had a coworker whose brother, or cousin, I think it was her brother, played for the Cowboys. So every year, I would get this signed poster. Who I have no idea where they're at now, but you're talking about Roger Staubach, Robert Newhouse, Preston Pearson, Hollywood Henderson, all these people on this team. Tony Dorsett. She'd get me a poster every year. She'd get a poster signed and she'd give it to me.
That's
cool. And I had them rolled up. I remember I used to tack posters or tape them on my wall, and when we move, I'd rip them off or would just tear them down because they were kind of tattered and torn. And I didn't think at the time, like, oh, this is going to be worth something one day with all these autographs on the poster. Roger Staubach signing by his name. Imagine that. So that's how I got started with that, and I kind of like it just evolved. My father was a Cowboy fan because he was from Oklahoma and Texas area, so it just kind of like evolved in that. And we just kept watching.
How do you think television influenced your life as a child and adolescent?
It kind of, if you let it, I think it kind of influences what's expected of you socially, what to wear, how to wear your hair, how to dress. Especially back then, you're talking about that was the only means you had to see what people were doing in other parts of the world or other parts of the country, but not even the world back then. I think it was more. You're talking about somebody you didn't show a lot of. How can I put it? Kung Fu Theater. I'll give you an example. Kung Fu Theater came on Saturday afternoon, and it influenced the whole genre of like Kung Fu. That's why I first knew about Bruce Lee and Jim Kelly. So we used to wear the Bruce Lee shoes. I forget what the crocosac. I forget what they're called, but they're like. I remember getting into martial arts and wanting to dress like Bruce Lee. I had nunchucks. I would cut my mom's broomsticks up into nunchucks, and I was trying to emulate the martial artists that I seen on TV, unsuccessfully, I might add. But I could count the bruises on my head and elbows from nunchucks, homemade nunchucks. But yeah, that was an influence because I saw that. And football players, I think, because I played football, I'd watch the way they wore their uniform. certain ways. Even and it still holds true to this day. Coaching young players, a lot of NFL players will put their gloves. They'll hook their gloves onto their face mask. So I see a lot of young dudes now. They have first of all, I didn't have gloves when I played, but now they have gloves that have to be hooked on the face mask, just so a towel that they would have properly placed on their belt or whatever their favorite player was. And I remember even putting a handkerchief. What they call, they're not handkerchiefs. They're like the bandana. So there was a guy years ago. He was a quarterback, and he used to wear a bandana during the game. You'd see I think he played for Oklahoma. I want to say his name was Lott. No relation to Ryan Lott, but he used to wear this bandana that would stick out the back of his helmet. So I used to wear those during games, but I was influenced by that, the stuff that I seen on TV. So you see the way the players wore their cleats if they had white cleats. Because back then they didn't have a lot of white cleats; they were all black. So I wanted white cleats. But yeah, everything that was kind of like this kind of set fashion trends. I think that you were.
What were your children's viewing habits of television like?
Oh man, cartoons! I think our biggest experience together for cartoons. They watched a lot of. They didn't. I don't remember them watching a lot of cartoons on their own. Barney, a little bit of it, but the main one I think that really started the whole cartoon thing was SpongeBob. And I don't know, I got turned on to SpongeBob and thought it was cool. And I sat them down with me one day and we started watching SpongeBob together. So from that point on, that the bond of me watching programs and going to the movies with my kids, as far as watching SpongeBob. My oldest son watched Ren and Stimpy. And I forget what was the name of that one. There was one where the cow was standing upright and the udders were like bright red. It was the strangest cartoon ever. But they had these. It was like it was the same people who made Ren and Stimpy. I don't know if you remember Ren and Stimpy.
Okay, yeah.
And there was a cow and his udders were like bright red, but he was walking on his hind legs. And I never understood that. And this was as an older man. I'm thinking like, how are these kids understanding these characters was just strange. But yeah, that channel, I forget what channel it was, but that channel had a lot of those cutting edge cartoons where it went away from Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck. I think SpongeBob for me was kind of like that was the beginning of all these other Ren and Stimpy type cartoons, where it's almost like okay, that's not maybe appropriate for a child, but the child had no idea what they were watching. But as an adult, you're thinking like, what are we looking at again? I mean, but as an adult, you're more aware. But the kids didn't recognize that. They just saw the simple characters on like Ed, and Eddie. That whole I forget what channel. There's a channel that all these cartoons came on.
Was it Nickelodeon?
Yeah, it might have been Nickelodeon 2 or Nickelodeon something, but they show the cartoons. You watch one, it was just kind of like they just kind of cascaded into one another, and if you watch this one, then this one would come on, and then you might change to something else. But for the most part, it stayed on that channel. So Nickelodeon was a big part, I would think, of that, and then going to the movies.
So, what would you say the biggest difference was between your experience with TV and your children's growing up?
I think they were exposed to a lot more stuff. Just I didn't have the options. I think options are the biggest thing. I mean, they were exposed just to commercials.
How many TVs were in your house?
Every room.
When your kids were growing up?
TVs in their room, TVs in our room.
So no longer one living room TV.
Oh, there was a TV in the kitchen, 10 feet from the TV in the den. It was like, why is there a smaller TV? And not to mention computer screens. So you figure if you had a computer screen, so you had that too, you had a desktop somewhere, so you talk about that's considered actually to me a TV screen.
So the next section deals with movies. So what were your first movie going experiences like, and how were they different from today?
As a kid, we didn't go to the movies a lot. You didn't have a lot of my parents. I didn't go. I think the matinee for me, I watched kung fu movies. Bruce Lee was a lot of that. That's the main one I can remember was Bruce Lee movies. And growing up on a military base, I remember having to stand for the national anthem. We did that. I remember that was something that I thought was like normal all over because that's the whole thing I was exposed to was a military base. So I kind of had once people retired when I was in junior high, my father was still in the military all through high school. But a lot of my friends, their father retired in junior high. So we go to the movies and you're looking around to stand up for the.
So you're saying actually while you're at the movie theater on the base, they would actually
right
do
before
the national
on the screen
anthem,
to come up. Bum, 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 please rise for your. Yeah, so it was like one of those things where you just did it automatically. So I just thought, and again, everywhere.
Like something that happens before a sporting event is something that they're doing.
At a movie theater. You'd go there and they do that at the movie theater.
That's interesting.
And they didn't have the.
Do you know if they still do that on bases today?
They don't even show. If they have a base theater, first of all, a base theater was specific to that base because you had to have military clearance to get on the base to watch it. So it was for the military people. Now the theaters, they're so crazy as far
were the movies that were being shown on the base the same that were the movies that were out at the time?
I didn't even know because that's all I knew.
Okay.
The base was a world all into itself, and everything you did, I didn't go off the base, off the reservation, so to speak. So my whole life revolved. There was so much to do on the military base for what I did. Played sports, went to the movies, hung out with friends, rode our bikes up and through the neighborhood, which was a military neighborhood. So you're talking about Arnold Heights, across from the Veterans Cemetery. So that whole neighborhood was isolated. The school was there, the neighborhood was there, so you couldn't pedal.
This is a part of March Air Force Base, right?
Yeah, so you couldn't pedal, and you could, but you were not going to pedal all the way from there to Warner Ranch. I mean, that would be like riding from here to Canyon Crest.
Wow.
I mean, but there's no way you would do that. Just so everything was self-contained. You didn't have to leave the base.
It was like a city within its own.
Yeah, and then it was probably better that way because it was, military minds. People thought the same way, and people were squared away the same way. So there was no, long-haired. Everything was done. Lawn inspections. You expected to act a certain way. So.
What were some of your favorite films growing up, and why?
I would have to say, like I said, the Bruce Lee movies was a big influence. Brian's Song. I remember seeing that on TV, and I'm not even sure why I watched it. I don't know how it came about because for a kid, I don't know. That's kind of a slow movie. There's not a lot of action. But again, the thing that drew me to it was the fact that it was about football players and Gale Sayers. And I remember hearing about him, and watching the movie. But it was less about football as opposed to their relationship. But yeah, that.
What do you remember, or do you remember anything about Al Jolson and the first Talkies?
I don't remember. I mean, that's blackface, right? The guy.
Al Jolson was, I believe it was Singing in the Rain was the first. Talkies were the first films that actually had sound recording. I think the first, or it was the. I'm sorry, it wasn't sound music. It was the. Was it the jazz singer? Let me look it up.
So I think Al Jolson. I said, wasn't he the guy that had blackface? Was he in blackface at one point?
I believe so. Yeah. I believe that.
That's my only.
Yes.
Knowledge of him that stands out. I couldn't tell you outside of that. I just remember blackface and white lips.
The jazz singer was the first. Talkie, did you ever watch that? That came out in 1927.
No.
Okay. What do you remember about the excitement surrounding Gone with the Wind, if at all?
At the time, I don't remember any excitement on my end.
Were there films that your parents forbade you to see?
No, because there was nothing that was so bad that I couldn't watch it. Everything. I think on TV especially, you'd have to really, if it was something that bad, you'd have to go out and seek it as an adult. You couldn't do it as a kid. I mean, the worst thing from a media standpoint would be Playboy, Penthouse, whatever. And you probably got that from your dad. I don't remember I never had access to it, but I had friends who had it underneath their bed. But as far as like seeing something just totally violent, movies weren't made like that. I mean, The Godfather. Let me see. Godfather's probably the most. I remember seeing like The Omen, The Exorcist, stuff like that. Was my parents didn't necessarily. It wasn't they didn't have to. I didn't want to see it as a kid. I'm thinking to myself, I don't want to see anything that has to do with the devil. But again, it's one of those things where there was not a lot that they had to really monitor because what is it the FCC who monitors radio and TV? They did it, so you couldn't even see anything that was too crass on television, especially regular channels, because everybody was watching the same thing. So if something that crazy showed up on Channel 7, oh my God, that would be just, you would be on the air wrong.
What films were the most influential to you?
I'd say, again, the only thing I really watched was sporting events. I think that the videos, music videos, again, back to the music, that was I think from the time
music was the most influential.
Oh yeah, I remember being a freshman in high school and getting ready, and when MTV actually showed music videos all day long and not, real reality TV. That's how I really, now I'm putting a face with the music. Now I'm watching guys actually play the guitar, and I'm seeing like, oh, that's really cool. I'm seeing what kind of guitar it is. But I'm looking at stuff differently because I'm looking at his hands. I'm trying to learn stuff, so I'm looking at him. Where was he at on the guitar when he played? So I had a different mindset when I watched the video, but just listening to it kind of exposed me to certain things. So I probably had MTV on, and then they had BET, Black Entertainment Television, that came on. So I'm introduced now to hip hop artists. You're seeing videos with people dancing and seeing people actually rap, so you can put a face with the music.
What were your children's viewing habits like of television? Or actually, movies, not television. Sorry. What was like their movie going experience like?
The stuff that Disney stuff. Lion King was a big anything Disney. The Princess and the Frog, Lion King. Even to this day, me and my daughter go see Disney movies.
So would you say you go to the movies now more than you did?
Oh yeah, most definitely.
As a child,
definitely.
So what would you say the biggest difference is? Or how did their movie experience different than yours growing up?
Oh, it's definitely there's surround sound. Just the quality of the picture. It was an event. I mean, everything. But I think movies, between the hype behind the movie, it made you feel if you didn't see it, you're missing out on something, which is by design. Like you take Game of Thrones now. If you haven't watched all 7 seasons, oh my God, you don't know about Game of Thrones. You have to watch it. So anything that there's so much hype surrounding it, you have to remember people are selling movies 3 months out. You'll see we're watching movie trailers for stuff that's coming out in September, stuff that's coming out in the summer. So they're hyping it the whole time, and they have sequels to the Avengers or whatever. So you have if you've seen the first 7, you have to watch the conclusion or the last whatever. I just think that their viewing experience is just so much more grander than what I don't even ever remember movies being hyped. Star Wars was probably the most hyped movie back then as a kid, and it's nowhere near what it is today. Because I think just because you can access so many people through social media alone, and you can post reviews, and people are reading reviews, and they're giving their theories about characters and what this means. And like I said, nobody had that back then to where you could spread it by word of mouth or social media.
So you would say, I think you mentioned this earlier, nowadays there's just way more information
there's
out there.
Yeah, you want to know about something? Oh, I know it. I'll just Google it. It's right there at your fingertips. Not, I got to go to the library, got to get a book, got to get the right book with the right information. Now you'll get, hey Siri, what's such and such? How old is this person?
Right. Well, that concludes the interview. I just want to thank you for taking the time to do this interview for me.
No problem.